Hey guys, Billy Bramer here. I'm a lead gameplay programmer at Epic Games, and I'm here to talk to you today about blueprint networking, specifically making multiplayer games work through blueprints. Networking is a pretty complicated topic, so we'll try to break this into multiple pieces just so we can get the gist of it. This tutorial assumes a decent knowledge of blueprint basics, but no networking knowledge whatsoever. That said, it's actually really important to understand some basic concepts of networking first. So before we actually go ahead and dive into the blueprints, I've prepared a very quick little PowerPoint to go over some basics of networking. Now I know what you're saying, this is totally not what I signed up for. PowerPoint is not what I wanted to be looking at, but if you bear with me, it'll be really quick and we'll get some basics under control. So the first thing to understand with Unreal's networking and blueprints and in code is that the games run on what is called a client-server model. And that means basically if you have a server machine who is serving as the host of the game, and it's allowing potentially multiple clients to connect to it and communicate data with it back and forth. Thing you want to notice here is that the communication between the client and server is happening such that the client sends data to the server, and then the server sends any of that data out to the other clients. The clients, for gameplay purposes, usually don't communicate directly with each other. So an example here would be if you are a client attached and you're using the keyboard and you're playing a shooter and you use your WASD keys, you press W to move forward, you would tell the server that you move forward, and then he would broadcast the information necessary for all of the other clients to know how you moved. An important thing to keep in mind in how all of this works is that throughout all of the process, the server is basically the king, as you can see by this nice little crown right here. You want to always make sure that things that are very important from a gameplay perspective, in terms of like the rules or who wins, who loses, if you modify somebody's health, anything that helps determine how gameplay functions, happens exclusively on the server. And then if clients need to know about it, we make sure that we tell them that for the purposes of like if they have to display a UI or updating visual information. But again, if we had our shooter example, if two players are shooting at each other, when one actually takes damage, you want the server to be the one that determines that and who actually subtracts the damage so that the client machines can't actually cheat. When we talk about servers in Unreal, we basically are focusing on two different types. The first is known as the listen server, and the easy way to think about this is that there is the machine that is hosting the game and acting as the authority is also running a client on it at the same time. So if you pretend that you are hosting a game on your own computer and you invite your friends to join you and they type in your IP address and you connect to each other, in this case you would be the listen server. Your machine is operating as the server for the whole game, but you yourself are also playing. You have a monitor, you're seeing visuals rendering, and you're entering input directly. Conversely, the other one you will often hear about is a dedicated server, which, as the name kind of implies, is exclusively devoted to acting as the server for other clients to join. So it historically does not have input or rendering going on. There's not a local player playing on the server. Dedicated servers traditionally also have optimizations that allow them to be cheaper, obviously, because they're not rendering anything. And some games will also even make the executable for the dedicated server an entirely separate executable that only contains special logic that it knows to also help prevent against cheating. For the sake of these tutorials, we'll mostly be looking at listen servers, but the basic general gist of all of the things that we're going to go over will apply to both cases. One more thing we want to cover in this presentation before we get out of PowerPoint land is the concept of replication. Replication is a word you're going to hear a lot throughout these tutorials and is important to understand. The very simple explanation of it is just assuming that it's data and commands basically being communicated between these machines back and forth and how we opt to do that. So if, again, we go back to our simple shooter example, if we have our guy here with his full health and he's really happy, how we handle when he takes damage and then send it to the other clients and now he's sad and he's lost health, we would call this replicating the health value. The server itself has handled the change. It's made sure that the change is legitimate. It's decremented his health, and then it replicates that value to clients so that they can see what the value is and if they want to display a health bar, things like that. So whenever we say replication or whenever we're talking about that, we're effectively meaning the transmission of different data and commands between these machines and how they communicate. And there's a lot of things we can replicate. We can replicate variables like health here. We can replicate the existence or non-existence of actors. So we could say that this guy doesn't even happen to spawn on clients. And we can also replicate blueprint function calls, which we'll get into later as well. So as we step out of PowerPoint, the one more thing that we want to definitely make sure we cover before we even get into any Blueprint scripting at all is how you actually play your game in a multiplayer way. So if you're in the editor, which I assume a lot of you will be if you're interested in the blueprints, there's the play button up here, which you're probably familiar with, actually has additional options in this drop-down that will allow you to test multiplayer really quickly. So you can go here, number of clients, and you can change this. I already have it locally set to 2 because I've been doing some multiplayer stuff. But normally it'll say 1, right? So you'll play it, you'll press play, and you'll get your window here. For the purposes of this demonstration, I also actually went into advanced settings and changed the default window size and all that stuff so that we can have multiple windows easily on the screen. But if you want to try multiplayer, you go here, we change this to 2, and then when we run it, you'll see we have 2 windows, and at the top, this one says preview server, and this one says preview client. Now the HUD is also rendering server and client, but that is actually something special done in this test map. That won't happen by default when you're just making a level. But this situation has this window in the left in the position of a listen server. So he's acting as the server, and as you can see, I'm still providing input, I'm still moving around, and I'm playing. And then this window is the client. If you wanted to emulate a dedicated server, you actually can do that through here too. You go back to your drop-down, there's a checkbox that says Run Dedicated Server. And then you can actually, if you want, change this down to 1 client. And what you'll see happens is when you play it, the window that pops up, even though there's only 1, it says it is a client because it's connected to a dedicated server emulation in the background. So this is still the equivalent of like being a client, but now you're connected to a dedicated server with, it's not rendering anything, it's not handling a player locally playing on it. Okay? Now, aside from inside the editor, and we'll just uncheck this to be ready for future demonstration. Aside from in the editor, like if you wanted to play the game, quote unquote, for real, outside of the editor using the executable, there's a lot of ways you can do that. You can do it with commands on the console, you can do it with shortcuts. For me, if I know I'm going to be trying multiplayer stuff or like working on multiplayer stuff for a while, I like to actually make shortcuts. So here we have two different shortcuts I've made to the UE4 editor, one for client and one for server. And if I open them up, it's going to be really tiny, so I'll just show you in Notepad what this looks like. Effectively, for the server, you want to put on in the target box right here. Let's see. So server, when you open up your shortcut and you have target, you want to append at the end the name of your project, the map you'd like to open, a question mark, which is the way that you can specify additional options to a map. And in this case, we put listen, meaning we would like to open this map as a listen server. And then we include -game to specify we would like to run the game and not the editor. So if we go ahead and double click that guy, he will start loading up as a server. And then if the shortcut for the client is very similar if we go back and look, except for we're putting the project name and then the IP address we would like to connect to. In this case, it's 127.0.0.1. If you're not familiar, this in networking terms is basically called localhost. It effectively means you would like to connect to yourself. So here is our server that opened, and if we go to our client shortcut that would like to connect to localhost, we should see that he shows up in this map in a couple seconds when it loads. And there he is. So here he is, he sees the server over in the dark. And that's how you would do it with the game executable instead of doing it in the editor. But either are valid options for testing things out. You could also, if you were already in a game, or if you already had the game open, you can do this on the command line. You hit the tilde, and you can do open, space, the map name, like this one's network features, you could put question mark listen, so on and so forth. That would open the map as a listen server. Okay? So we're gonna pause here as part 1. Quick intro into basics on networking and how to actually connect to a game. And in part 2, we'll go ahead and dive into the blueprints in this test map and start taking a look at how you can set your blueprints up for networking.